Hello again, this is Grant Swartzwelder, and welcome to another episode of Oilfield Strong. Today, I'm just very fortunate to have a great guest on a great topic. It's one that I remember 20 years ago when I was in college, well, now it's 30, 40 years ago, that nuclear engineers were kind of pushed over in a corner. Now it's all of a sudden become the hot area, whether that's because of the green world, the demise of the oil industry, and I put that in quotes. I'm not quite sure, but our guest is going to tell us about that and tell us how his company that he formed a few years ago is going to lead the way into a better nuclear type world. Today I have Douglas Robison, who is founder and CEO of Natura Resources. A fascinating individual, had a history in the oil and gas industry, doing some very innovative things on horizontal drilling and fracture stimulation with EXL Petroleum out in West Texas, has been on the Energy Planning Council for the state of Texas, appointed by Rick Perry, the governor, really a thought leader. And so that makes me think he's on the cutting edge of what he's doing here on the nuclear side. We're going to find that out. So Doug, welcome to Oilfield Strong. Really appreciate it. It's always dangerous to have people on that know more about a subject, which tends to be almost any time I have a speaker, but I know for nuclear, this is definitely the case. So be gentle with me, and we'll try to fight through this thing. But let's just lead with kind of a softball question. Tell us about Natura Resources, what you're trying to do. Then we'll kind of back up a little bit and talk about the nuclear industry and kind of how times they are a-changing, and kind of go from there. So welcome, Doug.
All right. Well, any interview that starts with a quote from Bob Dylan, I'm in favor of. So thanks for that. Grant, just to build on your introduction, I spent 40 years in the oil and gas industry in West Texas. In fact, I'm third generation Texas oil man. Started as a landman with Exxon in 1982, and it's nothing like the TV show, not near that exciting. And we could talk about that maybe some other day about what we did at EXL. You referenced that 20 plus years ago in the hydraulic fracturing revolution, and how that feels so many similarities to what's happening, perhaps is happening, hopefully is happening in the advanced nuclear space. But all that aside, Natura Resources, I was retiring in 2017, around there, thought I was, from that 40-year career, and was expecting to kind of roll out of the oil and gas industry, and I ended up rolling into advanced nuclear, really because of a interesting research project that I was funding, actually through my nonprofit foundation, just because I thought this technology can bless the world in some really significant ways. Governor Perry, who I served with in a lot of different ways in the oil and gas world when he was governor in Texas. Now Secretary Perry is Secretary of Energy in the first Trump administration. Right. Heard about the research that was going on at Abilene Christian University that I was funding, and sent a team down and toured the labs and said, you need to fly to DC. We flew to DC, and to early 2019 said, we need you to build this reactor. It's critical technology from a national security standpoint. We have to beat China. We have to beat Russia. So I held my hand up and said, I'll fund it. And President Schubert, ACU, held his hand up and said, we'll host the demonstration reactor on the ACU campus. And that's when my retirement ended. It's no looking back, quite frankly. And so Natura Resources was formed after we got a programmatic letter of support from the Department of Energy in late 2019. I carried the project out of my pocket for the first 5 years, so literally kind of processing and reutilizing profits from the oil and gas world for advanced nuclear. Deployed $30 million into 4 universities because that's where the intellectual knowledge about advanced nuclear lays, and it did at that time, certainly. And so Abilene Christian being the host university, University of Texas at Austin, Texas A&M University, and then Georgia Institute of Technology, and said, let's go get a permit. I'm an oil and gas guy. My company, EXL Petroleum, we grew through the drill bit. What that means is that you drill for production, and which, we did the hydraulic fracturing, led that revolution in the, early 2000s. And so if you're not drilling, which means in the oil and gas world, turning to the right, you're not making whole, however you want to put it.
Right.
You're not doing anything. And so the only way to build a reactor in the U.S. is you have to have a construction permit from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. If you say you're building a reactor without a permit, then the next knock on the door should be somebody from the federal government saying, we need to talk, because it sounds like you're building an unlicensed nuclear reactor. So obviously we don't want that. So told the team, let's go get a permit. We filed our application within 2 years, and within 2 years had pretty much passed everybody in the space. And the good news is, and the hard work by our team and by the NRC, I give them credit for the hard work they did. We got our construction permit for the first liquid fueled reactor ever permitted for construction in September of 2024. Only the second advanced reactor ever approved for construction. And at the same time, partnering with ACU, we built a $25 million science engineering research center that is currently the nation's only advanced reactor facility. So that's a very brief overview without getting into the technology, but kind of giving you an idea of the pace at which we are moving.
Now, and in one way it seems very fast, in another way very slow. And I think that might be the nature of the regulation and the government and the complexity of what you're talking about. But there's a lot to unpack there. Let's start off just so Natura is focused on molten salt reactor. And this is where I'm going to get off hard left into a ditch with my lack of knowledge. But explain what you're doing and how that's different than other forms of nuclear technology.
So the two, you got half of it in that sentence. The other part is a molten salt cooled liquid fueled reactor.
Well, I'll just say I'm very proud of myself for getting half of it. So
yeah, and so the simple answer, and it's obviously much more complex, and I want a PhD in nuclear engineering or something on the call, but it's a Generation 4 technology. It was pioneered at Oak Ridge National Lab in the 1960s. It was demonstrated in the 60s. The MSRE, which is a molten salt reactor experiment, that operated for about 5 years. China has just deployed a molten salt liquid fueled reactor. Same technology we're doing, kind of going back to the DOE saying we need to beat China. We're not, and I say we, the U.S. is competing with China and Russia, and we're right now currently, unfortunately, behind both of those countries in developing technologies and deploying reactors. But so the molten salt cooled, a reactor is basically an incredible furnace. The fission process creates huge amounts of heat, and you have to transfer that heat from the reactor core. The core is where you're using a moderator like a graphite to slow the particles down so they collide. When they start colliding, they fission and split, and that's where the heat is released. And you have to transfer that heat in that moderator to where you ultimately are boiling water to generate steam to turn a turbine. I mean, it's pretty simple from that standpoint. And so the molten salt cooled is what medium are you using, what material are you using to move the heat from the core to where you're turning a turbine. Water, which is current light water reactors, use water. Water goes to steam at a very low temperature, which is what you want because you want to create steam. That's where your pressure comes from. But because water moves to steam at such a low pressure, at such a low temperature, you're dealing with incredibly high pressures. And if you've never ever been around a steam line, you know what I'm talking about. Right. The pressures associated with that, or if you've ever had a pressure cooker on a stove, you know what you're talking about there. I mean, that's a potential bomb in the sense that you could have a high pressure steam release, which is fundamentally what happened at Fukushima. We use molten salt, literally a form of salt, not your table salt, but a form of salt that is the fluid that carries the heat from the reactor core to where we ultimately generate steam to produce to turn a turbine. The advantage of a molten salt is we don't ever flash to steam. We never go to pressure with the salt. We use a series of heat exchangers where we move that heat from one salt to another salt, and from that salt to where we are boiling water, but there's no fuel anywhere near that process. We're 2 steps removed from that. And so we operate at incredibly high temperatures, over twice the temperature of a light water or our typical commercial reactor, which is that high process heat is incredibly valuable for manufacturing and desalination of water and so forth. But we always remain at a fluid. And so our pressure is basically atmospheric pressure, or we have a pump that moves the fluid because we're circulating the fluid through the core. But we never, so what's the pressure, say your garden hose? So the passive walkaway safety of that is we don't have those pressures. That's the molten salt. The other is the liquid fuel. So the fuel is melted in the salt like we would melt, say, sugar in coffee. And what that does is that increases our utilization of the fuel to almost 100%. So current light water reactors who have the fuel in a fuel rod, which is your first level of containment, use 3 to 5% of the fuel in that fuel rod. And by the time that fuel rod starts to degrade, then you have to pull that fuel rod. You still have 95 to 97% of the fuel in the fuel rod, but that has just become spent nuclear fuel, and it has to be stored on site, and we have to figure out somewhere to put that highly radioactive material for the next 300,000 years. And we're saying we don't do that because we're liquid fueled, so we don't generate unspent nuclear fuel the way current technologies do, which again, we're starting to address the waste issue. So those are the 2 primary technical distinctions. There's a lot of other attributes to it, but it's the molten salt, which is our heat transfer fluid, and then the liquid fueled, which goes to our efficiency and not generating waste that we see with current technology or with any form of a solid fueled reactor.
And you might take exception to this comment, but it seems like light water is more of the established. It has more history. It has kind of more development. But through the answer you just gave, seems like there are very clear reasons why it's worth focusing on the molten salt, the safety, the efficiency, things like that. Would that be true?
You need both. I mean, we've got light water reactors. We have light water reactors in Texas. We have them all across the country. That's incredibly safe technology. It's the safest form of energy, the cleanest form of energy that we have. So I'm not in any way suggesting or stating that our current nuclear technology is not anything but safe and clean. It absolutely is. The decision maker in the 1960s was, quite frankly, the Department of Defense at Oak Ridge, where the deploying and with the work those folks did back 60 years ago was just amazing. But the customer was Department of Defense. Admiral Rickover was building a nuclear navy, and he wanted nuclear reactors on submarines and on aircraft carriers, even toyed with putting one on an airplane. The middle of the Cold War, and we had to deal with the Soviet Union, and we also wanted to enrich uranium to plutonium for warheads. And so light water reactor, solid fueled reactor that is water cooled. It's a solid fuel, makes a lot of sense if you're going to put a small reactor inside of an aircraft carrier that's going to be moving across the surface of the ocean, and also the ability to, again, enrich to weapon grade material. So basically, the light water reactor, and they're incredible technology for doing all of that. And everywhere you turn in this industry are Navy nukes, people who have spent their career in the Navy operating with these reactors, and perfectly safe to do so. But it was basically a tank. You needed not a particularly efficient, but a very safe, very durable, formidable part of technology for these wartime applications. The customer today is not the Department of War, it's the Department of Energy. And so what advanced reactor technologies, and particularly what we're providing, is on top of our current technology. We're saying if you need power to power the grid, if you need high process heat for desalination or other manufacturing processes, if you want to capture isotopes that are created in the fission process for medical applications and nuclear batteries, these technologies are better than the tank. need a tank to drive across Abilene, Texas. Let's come up with a better vehicle.
And when you're saying
And
tank,
so-
are you talking because of the size, or is that just a metaphor for
It's a metaphor. It's an analogy to if someone says, I need a vehicle to cross the battlefield, well, we better put some armor on it, and maybe a good idea to put a cannon on top of it. And so you build this technology that it can survive that environment. Okay. That's not what we're needing today necessarily. We're again, the customer is not the Department of War, the customer is the Department of Energy. And so and I think we're going to still see the deployment of light water reactors. So those provide massive amounts of power. We just deployed the first two in almost 40 years in the Vogtle project in Georgia. The Trump administration is supporting a number of light water reactors with Westinghouse to be deployed. Those are the AP1000s. And so those have a place, those large reactors. Small modular reactors, which we're demonstrating at Natura, can meet much different needs, and it's kind of the all the above approach. Do we need oil and gas and coal and wind and solar? And yes. Do we need large light water reactors and small modular reactors? Yes.
So
each has a different strength.
So when Natura talks about modular and kind of smaller, how small is that? How modular is that? Is that 10 by 10? Or is that, give us perspective of how, because it sounds like y'all are trying to be able to have this in a little factory or for a city, and kind of, so it seems like it's pretty small, but what is small?
Well, the reactor we're building now and building under the construction permit from the NRC. So we're actually building the country's, we will most likely, almost surely, have go critical fission occurring in the country's first advanced reactor. Small modular reactor is, there's different definitions as far as the power output and so forth. But to us, it basically means you can manufacture the components, and there'll be multiple components or pallets, if you will. And then you can put that on the back of a semi, understanding the fuel is not in the reactor core.
Sure.
You add that once it's on location, and you can ship that to wherever you need to ship it. And so you now have the ability, instead of stick building, which means like a light water reactor where you bring in a specialized workforce to a location and you spend the next 10 years building that reactor at that location. Small modular reactors give you the ability to stand up a factory, hopefully in the US, hopefully in Texas. You know, that's what Governor Abbott asked us to focus on in this last legislative session here in Texas. And then you put it on the back of a semi, literally on the back of a semi.
So you're talking 40 foot by 10 foot.
Yeah, whatever fits on the back of a semi. So our
that's fair enough. That's pretty small. I just needed to have an idea of the mind.
Our reactor core for this reactor in Abilene, which is a demonstration reactor, will more than likely be manufactured by Teledyne Brown in Huntsville, Alabama. It will be shipped on the back of a truck to Abilene. It will be lowered into the reactor bay. And that reactor core the core itself is 8 feet wide and 10 feet tall. Our commercial reactor core, that's going to be 250 times more powerful, will be 14 feet wide and 20 feet tall. So
still very small relative to.
That's just an example of the amount of power that you get from nuclear, amount of energy you get out of nuclear. That's our basic definition of SMR, small modular reactor, is you can build it at one site, transport it to another site, install it, plug the pieces together, put the fuel in it, and start generating electricity.
And then you also mentioned the power. Give us an idea of the kilowatts, or whatever the appropriate terminology is, that what these different size could do, and what does that mean for a city or a plant? So have a perspective of the power generated.
I can use Texas as a good example because I served on Governor Abbott appointed me to the Texas Advanced Nuclear Working Group that just resulted in some pretty significant legislation this last session. Texas grid is 90 gigawatts, so we generally talk about gigawatts, and increasing rapidly. We have the first deployment of Stargate, which is the data center AI initiative here being deployed in Abilene, Texas. We can see it from the windows of our offices. Our commercial reactor is 250 megawatts thermal. So that's the thermal heat generated by that reactor. If you want to convert that thermal energy into electricity, then there's about a 40% conversion rate. So a 250 megawatt thermal single reactor core, Natura molten salt reactor core, will produce 100 megawatts of electric. So that reactor, 100 megawatts electric, would, with the entire facility, the power block, which is your steam turbines, which is just your traditional method of taking steam and turning a turbine and generating electricity, would fit on the size of a football field. Everybody's talking gigawatts, so we've engineered. We can now begin to cluster or to group multiple reactor cores together. So we can group 4 of our reactor cores. So now we're talking 400 megawatts electric into a single turbine that is generating 400 megawatts of electricity. And if we then cluster 3 of those 4 packs, we're now at 1.2 gigawatts of power being provided. We do that at a fraction of the cost of a light water reactor, and the footprint is almost insignificant. A 1.2 gigawatt of our technology would take about 50 acres, and that includes the exclusion zone. Because again, we have no possibility of releasing to the atmosphere. The exclusion zones that do exist around our current technology, and this is under ruling regulation by the NRC, is brought into the fence lines of our facility, because we are never going to release anything into the atmosphere because we never go to gas. I'm going back to that passive molten salt kind of part of the technology. So that's a 50-acre footprint for 1.2 gigawatts of power, and you can put it exactly where you need it, which means now we don't have to transmit those electrons across the state of Texas or across the state of California at the cost of tens of billions of dollars at time. We can put the power exactly where it's needed, next to the city or next to the industrial site that says we need more power, we need it quickly, we need it safely, we need it to be clean. We check every one of those boxes, and we can put it exactly where it's needed. So we can match the supply to the demand.
Well, and I think it seems like eliminating a lot of that transmission requirements also saves money, saves wires running across ranches, makes, I would assume there's a lot of loss going through the transmission, so your efficiencies are significantly higher by being able to locate it nearby.
And it deals with the hazards. I mean, so much of the wind or, fires, particularly in California and other Western states, are due to
Transmission lines.
These transmission lines, which we have to have. I mean, right now, currently, if you want power, you're going to have to move either you're going to move molecules, which means you're transporting coal or oil or natural gas through a pipeline or on a train, or you're going to move electricity over a transmission line. Ideally, you put the power exactly where the demand is. And that's one of the great advantages of small modular reactors and our technology, because it's a small footprint. You can place it next to the demand. And so you eliminate that need for all the infrastructure that we've had to have, because that's what the technology allowed. And we're saying we can do better with these small modular reactors that we're deploying.
And you said 90 gigs for Texas. One of your units would be 1.2. But again, so I can kind of figure this all out, it sounds like that's enough to provide the electricity for Abilene and the surrounding areas, or and I know there's a lot of devil in the details on that, but can you help me kind of understand what that means besides just, a decent percentage of the overall?
Well, I'll give you a good example of and maybe it transitions to another point you want to make, but we can hit it real quick, is the rise of data centers and AI.
Yes.
And as I said, we got Stargate on the horizon. That's a 1.4 gigawatt data center. There's another 1.4 gigawatt data center that construction has started on a few miles to the east. And there's a third 1.4 gigawatt data center that's going in about 15 miles to the north. So there's an incredible amount of technology being deployed, but requiring an incredible amount of power. if you combine those three projects, you're approaching the offtake or the demand of Austin, Texas, which is a fairly large metropolitan area.
Definitely.
If you consider, so the current grid at Texas is about 90 gigawatts, and this technology, or these forecasts have been rolling out now for a couple of sessions here in Texas. Our session meets every other year in Texas. So ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, forecast in this last session at one point that the foreseeable demand in Texas could be moving from 90 gigawatts to 225 gigawatts in the next 6 years. And much of that is being fueled by, a lot of it's being fueled just by the growth of Texas, by the electrification of society, right. But a lot of it's being fueled by new technologies, including data centers and AI. And so that's why Texas in 2023 put $5 billion into the Texas Energy Fund. That was aimed at generating more natural gas. Again, another form of reliable, dispatchable power. But this last session, they put $350 million into the Texas Nuclear Fund to advance nuclear projects that can do the same thing, dispatchable, reliable power. And on top of the 350, then our project had $120 million of a direct appropriation into the construction of our reactor here in Abilene. So a huge stamp of endorsement by the state of Texas, but also a huge indication that the legislators, and I think the state leadership, Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, and on down the line, has said we need more power. It has to be dispatchable, which means it has to be on demand, available 24/7, 365. Renewables can't check that box. Natural gas can, nuclear can. And so that's why we've seen those initiatives come out of Texas, billions of dollars being deployed by the state of Texas, saying we have to build our infrastructure, our energy infrastructure up here in the state. And other states are saying the same thing.
So an offshoot of that, do you see what you're doing providing I'm trying to think of the strategy of the supply chain of energy. Do you see what Natura is doing focus more on the project basis on like the Stargate and those type things, or do you see it as a base load that it just goes in community? And probably the answer is both, but where do you see, where's your vision?
I think Governor Abbott launched the Texas Nuclear group that led to the legislation. I was appointed to that by Governor Abbott in August of 2023. So following that session, and was put in a leadership role in that. And the two directives that Governor Abbott gave to us was we need to reinforce the grid with dispatchable power. We have a huge amount of renewable power, which is cheap energy, and it certainly plays an important role on the Texas grid and an ever increasing role on the grid, but we need more dispatchable power. And the second was we need to capture the advanced nuclear industry from Texas, from a economic development standpoint. I mean, we consider ourselves to be the energy capital of the world. Houston, Texas calls itself the energy capital of the world. And so I think what the governor said is let's keep it that way. And we need to, not only do we need to beat China and Russia, but from a Texas standpoint, we want to beat Tennessee and other states. Although I'll draw the line and say, let's just keep it in the U.S. And then I like the competition from state to state. As we started that work grant, the rise of data centers and AI occurred, and really occurred with the initial announcement of Microsoft and Google and Nucor, I believe, was the first one that said we need 100 gigawatt of power, and the definition was it wants to be green. We don't want to burn hydrocarbons, but we need it now. It's got to be reliable. It's got to be they need power to 4 nines of reliability, and which means they need it constantly. They can never go down, and the amount that they're willing to pay for that power. And so I actually went back to the governor's office and said, listen, just as a businessman, I'm trying to generate this new technology that's going to put power on the grid. However, we have this industry that's is incredibly important from a strategic standpoint, particularly AI, and we've seen that rolling out very rapidly. But that's going to be a huge consumer of what I'm hoping to generate, which is power. Is supporting that industry reinforcing the grid. That was my basic question, and the response back, which I totally understand, is if you are Natura, if you're providing power to an industry such as data centers or AI, that otherwise would want to pull from the grid, you are reinforcing the grid. Okay, great. We're on the right path. We're on the right path. Everybody's on the same page. And so what we're seeing happening, and it's happening in piecemeal, what that industry has for the most part done, that industry being the data centers and AI, because they need the power now, and power now, when they said that, they meant it, is they have moved to natural gas, which is a clean form of energy. It's still carbon. So you are burning carbon, but it's a much cleaner form, say, than other forms of carbon. And so we've seen a lot of deployment, and that's why we see so much deployment here in Texas, because we have huge reserves of natural gas. And we're seeing that around the country at other places as well that have available extra natural gas. So we're seeing the deployment today of natural gas. The question is, at what point are they going to transition from natural gas to nuclear?
Because there is a limit to how much there is a lot of natural gas, but at some point, I would think there's a limit. You got to look a little further out, and that's where you come in.
There is, and that's questions that I'm now posing to, and I would like for us to look at that here in Texas. Is we have a huge excess of natural gas. That's wonderful. That was enough, while we were doing the hydraulic fracturing technology 20 years ago in the Permian Basin, that's primarily crude oil. George Mitchell and the Mitchell Company and others were doing the same thing in the Barnett Shale near the Fort Worth area, and we're releasing unexpected amounts, reserves of natural gas. And a lot of our natural gas is being exported. So LNG exports, we're exporting that energy to around the world. But there is a limit. And as we consume, it's just simple supply and demand. As the demand for natural gas goes up, the price is going to go up.
Right.
And the question is, okay, is that going to affect what the consumers pay for power, or the data centers and AI and other technologies? Are they going to absorb that cost directly because their economics enable them to do so? And what does that look like? And I don't think we have fully wrapped our mind around how much natural gas is going to be devoted to new technologies, particularly data centers and AI, and for how long, and at what point does transition to nuclear begin to make sense? Natura, and this goes back to my oil and gas background, my philosophy is that, and was from the beginning of the project, it is my responsibility to de-risk the technology on my dime. We have to have skin in the game. We have to be invested in our project. And de-risking is the first question: is, can you get a permit? Yes, we got our permit in September of last year from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. If I don't have a permit, I can't build reactors. So we really don't have anything to talk about until I get to that point. But then you begin to answer other questions. How long is it going to take to build a reactor? How much is it going to cost? Do you have your supply chains figured out? Do you know where you're getting the critical components, and so forth and so on? And what Natura is doing in building, we're currently building the first reactor under the NRC construction permit. So when somebody says, do you have your supply chain? Yes, we do. Here they are. And here's where we're getting these components. Here's where we're getting these critical elements. Do you know how long it's going to take to build? Yeah, we're building it. Do you know how much it's going to cost to build? Yes, we're building it. And so we're at the point now of taking that demonstration reactor, because depending on what size reactor we deploy, 70 to 75%, up to 95% of the reactor design is exactly the same. And so now we have not just prototyped, we've actually demonstrated what a first of a kind looks like. And that is kind of indicative of the level of interest that we're now getting. I spend more time in New York and DC these days than I do in Houston and Dallas and Austin, because the interest in our project has elevated to where national leaders in DC are interested in how fast can you move, how can we help you move faster, and the investment community now at a much higher level is saying, okay, we think you have de-risked this project. We think this is real. Let's talk about how we put the significant amount of money that it's going to take to develop this new technology and actually begin to deploy reactors as quickly as we can.
So it sounds like you've definitely reduced a lot of risk, but keeps you up at night as far as additional risk or things that need to be worked out? Or is it just more execution risk of getting this thing built?
Yeah, I don't, nothing keeps me awake at night as far as the technology for two reasons. One is it was demonstrated in the 60s, and what we're doing is significantly the same thing as what was done in the 60s.
And when you say demonstrated, they built it, and so it's a proven technology.
Built it and operated it. Yes, built it and operated, proved that it works.
Okay.
And China has done the same thing today. I mean, there was a big,
probably using the technology that Oak Ridge developed, but that's probably a whole nother story. So
it is. We brain dumped into China decades ago. Maybe looking back, we wish we hadn't done that. And I know it's safe because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission put 80 examiners in reviewing our application and spent 13,000 man hours reviewing it. We answered over 300 questions over a 2-year period. It took us 2 years to prepare that application, multiple engineering studies. And so when we got our permit in September of 2024 from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, we know it's safe because they issued that permit. The one question the NRC really asked, and kind of the only question is it safe to deploy this technology? If you can't rise to that level of scrutiny, or you can't rise to the level of providing the NRC the information that they need to make that determination, you should not be deploying a nuclear reactor. I'm sorry, maybe you should go find something else to do.
That's a fair comment.
And so that's what that permit means. Is it safe? Yes. How do you know? This is how we know, because we would not have gotten that permit if it wasn't. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission actually, I think, is the world's gold standard in safety, meaning it is the high water mark as far as having to meet that level of review and due diligence. And I think I actually think that is a strength of the NRC that we should export to other countries. And what I mean by that is, if I've got a construction permit from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I should be able to take that to anywhere in the world and say, you know, if the NRC says I'm safe, they're a lot tougher than anything you have. You can rely upon this design of reactor. And so the thing that does keep me awake, going back to your question, is how do we meet the need? How can we move at the speed that we need to move at to begin to provide the power, to begin to purify the water, to begin to harvest the isotopes that can image and help and treat, even cure certain types of cancer? How do we move faster? And so it's not, can we do it? Should we do it? Yes, yes, yes. The question is, how do we move faster to meet the critical needs that are facing us?
In anticipation for that question, I was kind of brainstorming what challenges could be there, probably not risk, but capital, environmental issues, kind of public perception, change of administration, because it sounds like this administration has been very helpful. You've kind of addressed some of those in your comments, but none of those seem to be an issue for you.
No, it's not. This administration has leaned in a big way into energy across the board, obviously.
But what happens if it changes in 3 years?
So the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, referred to ARP-20 in 2020, that deployed $5 billion into a few projects we weren't in existence at that time happened. So a huge amount of federal funding that happened. I think that was initiated under the Obama administration. Under the first Trump administration, 2 significant pieces of legislation were passed through Congress and signed by President Trump to modernize the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, particularly in light of now advanced technologies that are coming forward. We got our permit for our construction permit under the Biden administration. And then we're in the current administration that is saying go, go, go. Also, so it's not, one thing I love about it, it's nonpartisan. There's no one that I have ever met that is pro-cancer, that doesn't want us to develop isotopes that can treat cancer. I don't think there's anybody out there that's pro-dysentery, that is objects to clean water. I don't think there's anybody out there that says I want to live in the dark and freeze to death. And so it's nonpartisan. We're providing clean, reliable, cheap energy. Our levelized cost of electricity for our technology at Natura should be at or below natural gas, which is incredibly affordable. So no one is opposed to that. And so it's not a political issue, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Everybody knows we need it. It's just a matter of how do we get there and how do we develop projects? And I say we, I'm speaking from a national sense and even international. How do we develop technologies that actually have a pathway to deployment? There's a lot of projects out there that a lot of ideas, most will never see the light of day. Some should not see the light of day just from a pure, this technology doesn't make sense, or it's not safe, or it's not economic. There are 2 projects that have construction permits, and we're one of those. And there's 2 other projects that have applications pending before the NRC. So the universe gets pretty small when you actually look at, okay, who is actually on a pathway, at least the way I define it. You have to have your regulatory approval, and then you have to actually be doing it before you can tell people this is what we're doing. And so that's been the approach at Natura. And I think that's the greatest challenge, to go back to Grant, is how do we meet those needs today? We experienced Storm Uri in Texas in 2021, a weather event. We lost power for a few days, and 300 thereabout Texans literally froze to death. Let's don't do that. That's not fun. That's not the right way. And we need, not only do we you don't conserve yourself from an energy standpoint into prosperity. Prosperity happens when you have an abundance of energy. You have abundance of affordable energy, and that's when technology innovation
and a variety.
Right. One technology is not going to do everything.
Kind of a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's important, is that we talk about the electric, but you've alluded to it a couple of times, of the other kind of side benefits, like the desalination and of water and things like that comes out of your system. Could you address that real quick?
Yeah, and it's not one or the other. It's kind of all the above.
Right. It's all a nice byproduct.
I'll give you an example on a power reactor. So we're talking a 250 megawatt thermal, 100 megawatt electric, going back to that single reactor core and the power block that would fit on a football field. So that of that power, we're generating obviously the electricity, and it's affordable, again, at the cost at or below natural gas. But the heat, the waste heat that comes off of that reactor can be utilized. So we're taking that waste heat that you kind of don't do anything with, and we can say we can desal produced water with that waste heat. And oh, by the way, the off gas that's coming off the reactor. So if you ask me what waste do you generate, I would say from one aspect that we don't generate unspent nuclear fuel, right. But a chemist would say, no, you've got off gases. You have things coming out of the fission process, and we would call that waste. But some of that waste is nuclear isotopes, and we can harvest those for imaging, diagnostic, even treatment and cure of certain types of cancers. So all of that happens simultaneously. The reactor, the fission process, and our technology is doing it all at the same time. You may not want to do that all in one facility. And so we have, as I said, we have 2 commercial projects that are moving forward, running parallel with our demonstration reactor we're building now. One of those reactors is a small reactor that's really suited for the harvesting of isotopes. But then the other is a large power 100 megawatt electric reactor that's being deployed to provide power to the grid. But you can do those things simultaneously. I had a conversation a couple of years ago with a gentleman, I won't mention the name, but large energy company, and I was speaking down in Houston, and he was asking me about our technology, where we were and what our progress was. And he asked me a couple of times about the isotope part, and he worked for an energy company, and I was, quite frankly, I was kind of ignoring him or not picking up on it. When he asked me the 3rd time about the isotopes, I realized I'm not listening. And I said, so wait, are you telling me you want to cure cancer? Why you produce energy? And he said, exactly. And so that gets really exciting. That, yeah, we can provide power to the grid. Is that important? Yes, it's incredibly important.
Definitely.
Can you harvest isotopes at the same time? Yes. And so when you start to combine those opportunities together, that's when you kind of enter into a new frontier of energy.
we're running along here, so just real quick, what should we expect from Natura in the next 6 months, couple years, whatever the time frame?
I think the next 12 months is a good marker. So in the next 12 months, what you'll see us file our application for operating permit. So we have a 2-stage process with the NRC. You have to get your construction permit. We got that in September of 24. That gives you the right to build the reactor. Then when you build the reactor, you have to get your operating permit from the NRC, which gives you the right to turn the reactor on. So we'll be filing our operating permit. I think it may have already been filed, but it should be filed before the end of the year. We are part of the DOE pilot program that came out of one of President Trump's executive orders earlier this year. The aim of that program is to have some reactors, and I think we are probably the only one, actually, quite frankly, where a fuel reactor could go critical, begin operating by July 4th of this next year. I think that is determinative on how we need Idaho National Lab. We're working with them on the processing of our fuel. So we could see the country's first advanced reactor go critical. At the same time, we are going to be moving forward with 2 commercial projects that I mentioned earlier with the NRC. I would like to see those filings. We already had initial meetings with the NRC, but I'd like to have those filings in by the end of the year, if not shortly thereafter. So what 2026 will look like for Natura, given the proper capital, which we're in the process of putting that capital together to make all that happen, is we are bringing online the country's first advanced reactor and our reactor here in Abilene, Texas. And we have commercial projects moving forward simultaneously for deployment of commercial reactors, providing power to the grid and harvesting isotopes. So those are the big mileposts that we'll see for Natura, which are all incredibly significant in the next 12 months.
And amazing, Doug, how soon that is. I had no idea that it was the time frame was that quick. I know you've been working on this diligently beyond belief, but that's much sooner than later. So fantastic, Doug. Well, Doug, you've achieved 2 things on this call. One is, I think, educated our audience and myself on just an amazingly important energy source. And you've successfully, I think, we'll let the audience decide, not embarrass me in my lack of knowledge on all of this. So that was, obviously, I think that second one is probably more important for me personally.
Absolutely.
The first
that
one
was
was
my
probably
primary
better.
goal.
Thank you very much for achieving that. So it's, but Doug, thank you very much. Thank you for what you're doing. Always appreciate your insight and your friendship. So
You bet.
take care, Doug.
Thank you, Grant. Appreciate the invitation.
As you just saw or just heard, just amazing technology advancements going on in the nuclear world. And with that, there's so many different aspects of that, from regulatory to capital to other things to make it happen. And you're seeing an example of basically an entrepreneur that has taken an idea and has worked in a myriad of areas, again, government, capital, private, academia, to make this happen. And it sounds like a very important aspect of our energy supply chain that will be needed in the years to come, whether we have data centers or not. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Oilfield Strong. If you have, then please provide this to your friends. Follow us on wherever you get your podcast or on YouTube, and look forward to you participating in our future episodes. Thank you.